All right. I think we will get started. Thank you so much, everybody who is here in this Zoom room with us for Local History Guild. This is Women's History Month. So my name is Marina Dawn Wells. I am Assistant Curator of History and Culture at the New Bedford Whaling Museum. And I'm just going to do a brief intro before we hear from our three speakers today. This is our quarterly Local History Guild Zoom meeting, which discusses different topics of art, history, science, and culture related to the South Coast and the region. So during this Women's History Month, Local History Guild today is going to explore the sort of underexplored histories of women on the South Coast and some other folks when they come up. Specifically in New Bedford and Fairhaven. So our three speakers today are going to explore how women actively shaped and really improved their communities during the 19th and then 20th centuries. So we have Jan Silva, Lee Blake, and Beth Luey, and I'm just going to do a brief intro of their bios before the three of them speak on different topics, different exciting histories, different stories. So thank you, everybody, for being here. First, we will have Jan. Jan Silva serves as the Program Manager of Visitor Experience and Resource Stewardship for New Bedford Whaling National Historic Park. She heads park operations and programming, as well as being the park's cultural resource expert, focusing not only on architectural history, but also local history. And she's co-author with Catherine Grover of a historic resource study of the Boston African American National Historic Site prepared for the National Park Service. Jan graduated from Princeton University with a degree in history and from Roger Williams University with a degree in historic preservation. And next, we will have Lee Blake. Lee Blake is a public historian who's received several awards for her work as a historic preservationist, preserving local history, and creating public spaces that celebrate people of color. These include the Robert G. Stanton Award for her work promoting and preserving the history of the Underground Railroad by the National Park Service in 2018, a Mass Cultural Council Commonwealth Award for her work in the humanities, and the Mass Humanities Governor's Award in the humanities, both in 2019, and a Bay State Legacy Award in 2022 for her work in African American history, and Women of the Year for the City of New Bedford for her work reclaiming Black history. And in 2023, she was awarded an honorary doctorate in African American Studies and Social Justice by the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. And then third, we'll have Beth Luey, who was director of the scholarly publishing program at Arizona State University for 25 years before retiring to the South Coast. Since then, she has worked as an editor at the Addams Family Papers at the Massachusetts Historical Society, where she's now chair of the publications program. Her main retirement project has been books about historic houses and the families who lived in them. And I'm so excited to hear more about these subjects and all of the exciting stories and research the three of you important leaders in this community have to contribute today. So excited to have a lively conversation. We'll hear from our three speakers, and then those of you who have questions, if you're dying to ask questions, please put them in the chat, and they may crop up, but we will hold off on the majority of our Q&A until after the three of our speakers have concluded. So thank you everybody in the Zoom audience and to our three speakers today for joining us. And with that, we will start with Jan. Thanks again.
Thank you, Marina. I'm Jan Silva, and I just wanted to kind of expose everyone to a document that I heard about in 2020. I think I heard about it from Lee Blake. And I think I wanted to make sure that it gets wider notice. So I have a little PowerPoint that I put together, and I'm going to share now. Let's see. Okay. Everyone can see that, correct? So I'm looking at African American women in New Bedford's abolition movement. And this is a photo or a daguerreotype, probably, of Amelia Piper, who was active in the Anti Slavery Society in New Bedford. And this is the document I wanted to talk about today. In 2020, I received an email, I think maybe from Lee, about a auction house that was trying to sell this
Mhm.
anti-slavery Society of New Bedford Constitution. They had it on their website, and they posted a few kind of screenshots of the document. And I looked at it, and I was just kind of blown away by what I saw. So I'm
Right.
just sharing a little bit of it with you so you can see. I found out the document was sold, had to track down who it was sold to. We in New Bedford can obtain access for of it. It's not copyrighted, so we can use it as a research item. But let me introduce you to the document. Oops, where's my? Oh, here we go. Come on. Okay. So the Anti-Slavery Society in New Bedford was founded on June 26 in 1834. So it's a kind of one of an early second wave abolition organization. The first wave would have been in the 1700s. The second wave would have been like 1825 to maybe 1850. And then going toward the Civil War would be a different wave. So this organization actually, this is the preamble right here, and I've done a little bit of a translation. The undersigned, impressed with a deep sense of the great evil of slavery, and considering its existence in the United States as utterly inconsistent with the principles of our institutions, the religion which we profess, and with, well, kind of, this is where I need more help with the transcription, but the fact that these are the words they use as a preamble for their constitution is pretty impressive. They really are making a big statement about anti slavery. And this is not the first anti slavery society. There was one in Massachusetts that was the New England Anti Slavery Society, was formed in 1831. But what's different about this one is it was actually interracial, and both men and women belonged to it. So it there's several articles in this Constitution. I have copies of all the articles, but the thing I really wanted to point out to everybody was the fact that we have a list of all the signers of this Constitution. And I highlighted some of them so you can see. So William Roach was the president of this organization. We also have James Bunker Congdon. So this is just all our usual New Bedford suspects that we talk about with anti-slavery. Andrew Robeson Jr. is on this side of the page, Joseph Ricketson. On the other side of the page, you have Daniel Ricketson, you have Andrew Robeson Sr. And one of the things I wanted to point out, there are also African-American men who signed this document. So you have Richard C. Johnson, you have Lewis Temple, you have Cuffy Lawton, you have Nathan Johnson, you have William Piper is a signatory, you have David W. Ruggles. So it kind of gives you a sense of these two groups working together. But that's not the best of this document. The best of this document for this month is the last slide that I have here, which is women who actually signed this Constitution. So it's quite a few women. I only highlighted the African-American women. So we have Ruth Johnson, who was one of Paul Cuffey's daughters, I believe. We have Nancy Clark, we have Amelia Piper, and we have Sarah Piper. So, this is unusual to have a interracial, multi-gender organization that is dedicated to anti-slavery in the United States. And I think for me, it raises a lot of questions like, why did they form this organization? What did they expect to do with this organization? Why was it important? So I think we need to figure out how to have new questions about New Bedford. I think it opens up a lot of doors for us to kind of figure out what we're looking at in New Bedford and, just kind of get some more answers about our own community and our own history. I don't know how long this organization existed. I know there was another New Bedford Anti-Slavery Society that was formed in 1847, So we know between 1834 and 1847, this one might have existed 10 years. We probably need to start investigating some more books to figure out if we could figure out other histories about it. There's papers in the library that we can examine to kind of learn more about it. But I guess, that's the point of this local history guild, to be able to kind of talk about new things and figure out new ways to study what we know in our local community. So, Marina, I told you I'd be fast, and that's kind of all I wanted to say.
That's fabulous. Oh my gosh. No, thank you so much for sharing this with us. And I think we can just leave this as a prompt for to explore a little further in the Q&A if that
Yeah,
works.
I think we should. I mean, I do want people to think about what kind of questions they'd want to ask around these documents because the way I look at history, I try to figure out the context, not only of what's happening in the community at the time, but also like the buildings, the architecture. Because as I was talking to someone today, I mean, 1834 is the same date that William Roach moved up to County Street. What was going on in the community that he moved to County Street, or why did he sign this before or after he moved? There's always so much synchronicity among people and environments and locations, and I always think we should be putting them together much more than we usually do.
Wonderful.
And I'm going to stop my share.
Wonderful. Thank you so
So,
much.
so I have a comment. Of course, Jan and I talk a lot, but when I saw this document, I also saw 200 years of activists. So while we look at this particular document, James Condon, what are we doing in the 21st century? We're finally naming a school after James Condon because people recognized he was an abolitionist. And when his name came up at the school committee, the Historical Society wrote a letter and said, you definitely have to keep this man's name because he was an abolitionist. And we had all this paperwork to show his paper trail and the work that he did around social equality. So it's fun to see these things. At the same time, we're getting ready to celebrate the 130th anniversary of the Union Baptist Church. A lot of the people that are on the document were the grandfathers of people who started that church. So just like Jan said, there are all these networks, but there are also all these descendants who worked on social change, men and women.
Wonderful. I think
Thank
that
you, Lee.
yeah, thank you for that, Lee. I think that that sounds like a good sort of avenue into your talk, Lee. Um, Speaking of some of the education components, and yeah, if you'd like to go ahead, thank you so much, Jan. And Lee, if you want to go ahead and share your work here.
Well, I am the president of the New Bedford Historical Society, and the Historical Society researches and documents the history of people of color. And one of the things we're working on right now is a number of the women in New Bedford who, right after the Civil War, about 1861 to about 1870, 75, who went south to teach the newly freed people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of them, but I wanted you to know, just as Jan said, this is another opportunity for people to be doing research. And I did genealogical research, which is how I found the names of some of the women that I'll share with you tonight. But I have names of women in Fairhaven who were part of this mission. So, Maria, next slide, please. So this is just a general picture of women of color who came together. These are not necessarily New Bedford women, but New Bedford has, in this particular study, as a city, we sent 40 women south. We did not. So people in the North, especially in New Bedford, recognized that at the end of the Civil War, with emancipation, that unless the enslaved people were taught to read and write, they'd just be continued to be enslaved. They'd be oppressed. They wouldn't be able to figure their way out of anything, wouldn't be able to read. So women across the North joined organizations to address this issue. And New Bedford sent 40 women, and those women were not necessarily women who had been educators. Next. So even individuals who became soldiers, literacy was illegal in the South for Black people. People gave their lives up in order to read and write. So even soldiers needed teachers to help them overcome years of illegal education or education which was illegal. And there are many great stories, including Sergeant Connie. Sergeant Connie couldn't read and write, and he learns to read and write in the woods of South Carolina when he's about 10, 11, 12 years old before he comes to New Bedford. There were illegal schools in the woods. Frederick Douglass at one point in time is a teacher, and he teaches people how to read. Once he learns how to read, and there's a whole story on that, but he teaches people because people understood, Black people understood that unless they learn how to read, do math, they would always be at odds and subject to fraud. Next. See this great picture of women who are there as teachers. Now, one of the women, I love talking about Harriet Jacobs. Harriet Jacobs writes one of the most important books at the time about incidents in the life of a slave girl, what it was like to be an enslaved woman at the time. But she also was a committed educator and an activist and an abolitionist. In her connections to New Bedford is that her family, the family that she worked for, was the Grinnell family, which is the Grinnell Mansion up on County Street. While the daughter of the Grinnell family lived in New York, Harriet worked in New York for them, but in the summertime, everybody comes to New Bedford. They come to New Bedford, they go to Dartmouth, they go to the beaches here, and that was Harriet's connection to New Bedford, was that on the summer she was the one of the matrons that worked for this family, and they would come and stay at the Grinnell Mansion and also enjoy our beaches and things, our programs in the summertime. And also she got to know the abolitionists here. In addition, just recently, like within the last 6 months, we found out that her brother John had been here for many times as a whaler and shipped out. So there are all these connections again that need some more work, but we have some good work on Harriet. Next. Now, Harriet was given, because of her relationship with people here in New Bedford, there are white women also who supported Harriet's work, and they supported her work by sending her money, by joining the Ladies Freedmen's Aid Society, Freedmen's Aid Society in New Bedford, local church groups. And this is a copy of a newspaper article that talks about sending $140 worth of goods to Mrs. Harriet Jacobs at Alexander. So the school that we just saw was supported by wealthy women in New Bedford. And these things, you know, as researchers, we don't necessarily always want to go to the microfilm, but that's where these things are. And so I found all these articles. And when you look at the names of people, this is Mrs. Looms Snow, Andrew Robeson, the Howlands, Slocums. These are people who were all involved Their husbands were involved in the abolitionist movement, Mrs. Joseph Ricketson. These people were all, the pillars of society in New Bedford. Next, please. Here's a picture of Harriet, and just so people would know what she looked like, but also to know Harriet's brothers, the Knox brothers, also lived in New Bedford, and they had a house, which is still there, on Campbell Street in New Bedford. So we get to look at these people who were in the 1800s, generations of people that came to New Bedford for different reasons, but for freedom. And we see their descendants, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren all lived here. Next. So this is who I thought Jan was going to talk about. This is Martha Bailey Briggs, and I have a lot of stories about Martha, but Martha was born in 1838. Her father, John Briggs, mentors Frederick Douglass. So there's an interesting connection between Martha and Frederick Douglass. Martha, as a young girl, is going to school here in New Bedford because New Bedford had public schools. And she begins an evening school in her house to teach fugitive slaves to read and write. So she's committed to education from a young age. She realizes how important it is. And she teaches here and she teaches fugitives, but she also goes on to work with some of the really important Black abolitionists in the country. She becomes one of the tutors for George Dowling. George Dowling lived in Rhode Island. He starts one of the first oyster houses in New York. So she's in this whole sphere where she's meeting Black abolitionists, men and women who are changing the country in many ways. And eventually, Martha Briggs teaches in Washington, D.C., and she is one of the women, one of the individuals who starts Howard University. She works specifically in what was called home economics. And for them at that time, home economics was about math and literacy, not about teaching people how to cook. It's a very different definition. And of course, we have the Martha Briggs Educational Club here in New Bedford that just turned 100, 110, 120? How many? I forget.
105.
105 years old. They have been carrying on her legacy of education all those years. Next. So this is Ellen Kempton. And Ellen Kempton, her family was a Kempton family, which Kempton Street is named after. Ellen left a diary. She was a public school teacher in New Bedford, I think at the Cedar Street School, but we're checking that out. She, in 1865, she actually goes south to teach. And her family is a family of abolitionists. She's an abolition. They're Quakers. And she decides that she's going to leave the public school system and go south and teach for a couple of years. So she goes south and she leaves a wonderful record of what she had to deal with every day. And it was my honor and the honor of one of my partners, Ivy McMahon, to get a copy of her journal and transcribe it. It had just been sitting on a shelf for over 100 years, but we were given access to it. We transcribed it, and Ivy worked very hard to have it, and some of the sites that Ellen lived in, to have some of those sites put on the National Register. Unfortunately, Ellen dies down south. She's in a boating accident. We always make sure that we mention her because people get so used to celebrating these wonderful legacies, they forget how difficult it was at the time. Ellen goes down south. She is there for the Freedmen's Bureau. She had no access to books or seeds. She's on the Edisto plantation. She has hundreds of students. There's no food. They have to grow their own food. There aren't enough seeds. And Ellen writes about all these things, what the challenges were when you don't have a system that is that works well with education in any way, or looks at families that are hungry, people that are not making money, people who can't read. And so Ellen writes about that. Next, and Maria Weston Chapman. Maria was an abolitionist, and she ran a school in New Bedford for young women. Her school is on 8th Street, right across the street from the First Citizens Federal Credit Union. There's a big gray building there. That was where we think her school was. But she taught young women. Her cousin was William Lloyd Garrison, but she also brought in a lot of speakers and talkers who would come and give lectures, and they were all gossiping about New Bedford and the great abolitionist movements that were here. Next. So this is Emma Piper. As Jan talked about Amelia Piper, this is Emma Piper. She is Amelia's granddaughter. At the age of 18, Amelia goes to Maryland in one of the programs at the Freedman School. She teaches in Maryland. She's the first teacher at a new school in Maryland that was set up just for enslaved people. And her family members, Amelia and her husband, William, were operators on the Underground Railroad, and their home on Bedford Street still exists. Next. This is where Emma taught, the Chris Rock School. She taught there for 3 years. They, about 10 years ago, we were able to send a copy of a picture of Emma down to them so that they could put it in their new school, which is now a museum. The wonderful story about this is Emma meets her future husband in Maryland. He's one of the students, an adult student. His family was tobacco growers, and he wants to learn how to read. So just like all the kids, he's in there at night school learning to read and write, and he falls in love. They fall in love. And when her time is up, she comes back to New Bedford, and he comes and follows her. He comes with a trunk, comes as a country bumpkin, comes to New Bedford, and her family allows him to live in the attic until he gets a job and becomes a functioning economic person, and then they're married. That wouldn't be the way I'd want to meet my new husband, but that's what she did. Next one. So this is Elizabeth Piper, and I like to tell this story because that's 3 Pipers. And what it is 3 generations of people who were abolitionists. Amelia, Emma's aunt Rebecca. We don't have a picture of Rebecca, but if you know anybody knows Rebecca Piper, we're looking for her picture. And then Elizabeth Piper. Elizabeth went to school here. She was born in New Bedford, and she also taught at Howard University. Her journey's a little different. She goes to Washington. She meets her husband. Her husband was formerly enslaved. They're married, and eventually they moved to Colorado. When they moved to Colorado, Elizabeth starts organizing women of color and men of color to fight for the vote. And because of her, the women in Colorado are the second state for suffrage in 1893. And she's on the National Register in Colorado, and just wonderful things about her, which all just happened like 4 or 5 years ago. In order to tell her story, I had family that I didn't really know in Colorado. And the two of us would like split up, like, where did she go to school? When she was in Boston, what was she doing? So I would be researching what was happening in Massachusetts, and my partner, Iris, would be researching what happened in Colorado. And we put together this wonderful piece on her, which is in the Colorado Library, but also helped her win Elizabeth win Daughters of the American Revolution in Colorado. So the research is always important. We just don't know what's going to happen to it. Next. Okay, so we have the names of all 41 New Bedford women and some of the individuals from Fairhaven. And I'm reading this for Beth. Elliot Whipple, he went to Lafayette, Alabama. Emma Tabor. Emma went to Port Royal, South Carolina. Mary Nichols, Petersburg, Virginia. And Jenny Howard, who went to Elizabeth City, North Carolina. So I'll send you the names, and you can make sure that people in Fairhaven have an opportunity. You never know, somebody might be, a great, great, great granddaughter of one of these women. And, the women didn't always tell all their stories. So that's what we're researching right now for the New Bedford Historical Society, adding another series of great stories about what women did. And people always ask, when I do house tours for the Nathan and Polly Johnson house, people always say, well, what did women do? And then I say, well, and then I just talk about all these women. Thank you very much for allowing me to do this evening.
Thank you so much, Lee. That was fabulous. A lot of information to spark juicy conversation in the Q&A, I hope. But with that, we will go on ahead to Beth, if you would like to go ahead and share your presentation. Thank you.
Before tonight, I had no idea what the three of us would have in common. But what I'm struck by, and this is true of much of women's history, is that we're talking about collective action. Even when we're learning about individuals, we're learning about them in the context of the organizations they belong to, the people they associated with. And when women couldn't vote or hold office, opportunities for a woman acting alone to change her town's politics or the quality of life were extremely limited. In groups, though, women gained more influence and prepared themselves for the day when they could take on real power. And some women's groups were auxiliaries of men's groups like Masonic lodges, but the two groups I'm going to talk about from Fairhaven were both founded by women and run by women, although they had a few men occasionally. The Fairhaven Colonial Club started in 1912, which was the town's centennial, when Fairhaven seceded from New Bedford. Although it was open to men and has always had a few male members, it was started by women, and the officers were almost invariably women. At its height, the club had 250 members and a waiting list.
Wow.
It was prestigious and, at least for the first few decades, snobbish. There was a note in the minutes of a 1920s meeting where the women debated quite heatedly whether it would be all right to admit a woman who actually had a job. um, so it was that kind of club. Applicants had to be nominated by a current member, and the board had to approve them. And the officers, I love this, the officers hired a New York Society photographer to take pictures of them, which we have, and pearls abound. You know, that was what the group was like. Like all women's clubs, as well as similar organizations for Black men, the Colonial Club provided a venue for members to learn the skills that would allow them eventually to take on leadership roles that were currently denied them. The club secretaries learned to take minutes and present them. The presidents and vice president learned leadership skills. They learned parliamentary procedure, how to run a meeting. The treasurers learned how to keep budgets and deal with banks and businesses. And they all learned how to argue and persuade others to work with them. If they wanted to learn speaking skills, public speaking skills, they could give talks about their travels or other things that they thought might be of interest. There's some wonderful places in the minutes where the ladies of the club went to the bank and convinced the trust officer that, yes, indeed, they should be given those $500 to buy the painting that they wanted for their house. The club was not purely social. It was essentially the town's historical society. Members and non-members alike donated family heirlooms of a variety of quality. I assisted a professional archivist to catalog the collection, and it ranged from real treasures to grandma's much used corset. The club also acquired paintings from area artists, including William Bradford and Charles Henry Gifford, but also from women artists who were less well known, including Elizabeth Delano and Rebecca Tabu. The club's first home was the old Academy building in Fairhaven, which was owned by the town, but it was in major disuse. In what I believe was a unique partnership, the Colonial Club took over the maintenance and repair of the interior, and the town was responsible for the exterior. So it was the Colonial Club that installed electricity, heat, a fireplace, and plumbing. They housed their collection there. They held meetings there. They held whist drives to raise money. They sponsored lectures. During World War I, they lent the building to the Red Cross to make bandages and to teach first aid classes. But only 4 years after its founding, the club received a gift that would change both its nature as a historical society and as a social club. Martha Coggeshall, a founding member of the club, had built a lavish house on Cherry Street in Poverty Point. It's on a large lot that slopes down to the harbor. And in 1916, she died. Her husband, children, and grandchildren had all predeceased her. So she left the house in trust, along with quite a large fortune, for the use of the club. The house became a place for members to socialize and to house their collection, to host teas, hear speakers, and generally conduct their business. During the 1918 influenza epidemic, they turned the house over to the town as a hospital. They took all their treasures up to the attic, and at least one member was always in attendance to help take care of the sick. Some of the members themselves became ill and were succeeded by substitutes. As women entered the workforce, the membership dwindled. to around 100. And in 2016, 100 years after Martha Cogswell's gift, the trust ran out of money to maintain the house and pay the utility bills. So the bank put the house up for sale, and the club was left homeless. There was no space available for the collection, so the board voted to sell it. This was not a popular move, not a popular decision among all the members and among a lot of people in town. So the board tried to soften the blow as much as possible. Items that had historical value but little or no financial value were given to the town archives. Other items were offered to nonprofits at the lowest assessment, and Frank McNamee, the antiques dealer who handled the sale for the club, waived his commission on those items. So as a result, items from the collection are now in Fairhaven Town Hall, in the Millicent Library, the New Bedford Whaling Museum, and the Whitfield Mangerow House. And also, I think the Siemens Bethel has some of the furniture. At the club's insistence, the bank that managed the trust turned over the proceeds of the sale of the house to the SouthCoast Community Foundation as an endowment to support historic preservation in Fairhaven. And it has already made significant grants to the Millicent Library, the Whitfield Mangerow House, and other institutions. The income from the proceeds of the sale of the collection is being used for grants for historic preservation, for financial support of residents in need of financial help, and for college scholarships. Most recently, the club gave a grant to the Millicent Library to digitize films of local events that were deteriorating and in danger of becoming useless. Only 3 years after the Colonial Club was founded, in 1915, the Fairhaven Mothers Club was founded. It was from the outset a service organization. Their goal was to improve the welfare of the town's children. Long before there was a social safety net, these women stepped up to protect the health and welfare of Fairhaven's youngest citizens. They provided services that we now expect our local and state governments to provide, and they did it without any public money. They were impressive fundraisers. Their annual gala, I suppose, a ball, became the social event of the year, and anyone attended and contributed generously to the club's coffers. Business owners could rarely resist their requests for donations, and the members themselves donated generously. At the most basic level, the club provided advice and support for pregnant women and infants. They first educated themselves, inviting healthcare experts, professionals to give lectures on the current understanding of public health and infant and maternal care. From these lectures, they came up with an assessment of what was needed, and they went ahead to provide it. They hired a nurse to do well baby checks and to work with new mothers. They held vaccination clinics. Excuse me. I've been vaccinated. I shouldn't be coughing. They expanded this modest beginning into what is now the visiting nurse service, a function that we now take for granted. They reach not only babies and newborns, but elderly people, invalids, anyone who could benefit from a nurse's care. And they showed public officials what could be done and how badly it was needed. And I think over the years, they actually shamed the select board, the school board, and even the state legislature into taking on some of these tasks that they had initiated. During the Great Depression, they sold milk tokens that could be given to children so they could buy milk in school. Again, the town and the state eventually saw that really children ought to have milk. But it was the women of the town who first saw the need and found the way to meet it. They learned that children's teeth were being neglected. So they convinced a local dentist to provide his services. They bought the equipment he needed, and they started a free dental clinic in the Tripp Elementary School. After a few years, the Board of Selectmen voted to take this job on for themselves. The women had a very broad definition of health. They felt that children needed outdoor exercise, supervised activities. They created the town's first playground. They provided all the equipment and they supervised them. The women of the club took turns as supervisors. We still have playgrounds, but we don't have supervisors. As the local and state officials took on these tasks, the nature of the club changed. And like the Colonial Club, it dwindled in size as women entered the workforce. Present members can still remember when the club provided childcare so that members could attend meetings, and some of the younger members remember being babysitters or being babysat so their mothers could attend the meetings. Although membership has aged and shrunk, the club has not stopped supporting children. One of the functions illustrates the way that that support has changed over the years. For many years, the club would ask a school nurse to identify a family in need and provide the club with the number of children, their ages and sizes, and what they wanted for Christmas. And then the club members would go out and buy gifts for the children. One member told me that the little girl whose name she drew had asked for socks for Christmas. And she felt so sad that this little girl wanted socks instead of toys that she went out and bought a bunch of cashmere socks so that at least they would be something special for this little girl. The club still provides aid at the holidays, but it no longer does it as charity for the children, but as gifts for the family. The club just buys gift cards to local stores, and the school gives them to the families in need. Sadly, this is the last year of the Fairhaven Mothers Club. Only 20 members remain, and several of them are in their 90s.
Wow.
I'm 79 and I'm one of the youngsters. So the club is looking for another group that will take on the holiday gifts. I think the story of these two clubs provides some insight into the complexity of women's changing role in the community. I'm a member of both clubs. I'm the secretary of the Mothers Club, and as co-president of the Colonial Club, I oversaw the sale of the collection, the dealings with the trust, and the creation of an investment and financial plan. So I have mixed feelings about all of these, the situation both clubs are in. On the one hand, I'm of course happy that for myself and for all the women who have had opportunities that the founders of these clubs simply did not have. I like to think that the women who set up the visiting nurse program, if they were alive today, would now be administrators of hospitals and healthcare institutions, that they'd be doctors and medical researchers, that those treasurers would have become bankers and accountants, and that instead of speaking at club meetings, they would be in public office. That the women who carefully preserved all those historical artifacts would be historians and museum directors and archivists. But at the same time, I can see that something has been lost. As a relative newcomer to both groups, I listen with a degree of envy as the older members reminisce about raising their children together, of helping one another. of having perhaps too good a time at parties, and of sharing high and low moments, of accomplishing much by working together. As a final note, both organizations have donated their archives to the Millicent Library. The Colonial Club records are extensive, and the collection has been processed with a detailed finding aid, an item level finding aid. The Mothers Club collection is in boxes as donated, and either one would be a great subject for someone who wants to do some research. So thank you.
Oh, that's so beautiful and wonderful. Thank you so much, Beth. And thank you, all three of you, so much for these stimulating talks and ideas. There's so much that I want to get into, and I think I imagine the audience questions for you too. But do you want to start? Are there questions that you have for each other? Are there ideas that came up? There are so many different relationships between these three talks. Are there things that any of you wanted to bring to the fore?
I know I wanted to ask Beth how many members were in the club, in the Colonial Club at the time you sold the building in 2016.
100, 150.
Oh, wow. Because Lee and I are both in Martha Briggs Educational Club, and we own the Sergeant William H. Carney building in New Bedford. And all the things you were saying were just reminding me of what it's like in Martha Briggs too, trying to maintain a historic building and how do you do it. And you have a lot more members than we have. But
We have, now we're down to about 35, I think.
Oh, okay. We have 30 members now. But it's
Yeah.
just interesting to see there are all these different women's organizations doing the same good work. But then my question is, why is there a decline in women's organizations? I mean, sometimes I think about isolation of humans, moving away from collective kinds of community-based organizations, community-based kind of social activities. And I think we lose so much when we start to move away from that and kind of go into our own little silos where we don't really talk to each other. And it's sad to me to hear that both of these organizations are kind of going through that.
Well, I think a lot of it, of course, has to do with the fact that women are working. And, you know, the Mothers Club always met in the middle of the day when the kids were in school. Well, that doesn't work. But men's organizations are also declining. So it's not just that, you know, people have moved to the workforce. And I think you're right. I certainly think that I moved here in 2006, and my way of meeting people was to volunteer to work. My greatest compliment was when the Mothers Club was getting ready for something. I had helped set up the whatever it was, and as I was leaving, I heard one of the older members say to another member who hadn't met me, "That's Beth Luey. She's a good worker." And that, you know, being able to participate and help and build something as a group is extremely important. And I think we really are in danger of losing that.
And your background sounds like mine, because when I moved here in 96, I did want to join a women's club, and I joined one in 2000. And it's the same thing. That is how you meet people. And, you know, I'm just trying to figure out how we change the trajectory of these clubs declining and figure out how to make them grow again.
I think what the Colonial Club has done is, because unlike most other clubs, we now have money. So we're planning more activities, trying to attract people, to the former members, to come back and to attract new members. You know, field trips and speakers and just doing more. We don't have a home, but one of the things we did, and I think this is extremely important, is we made a contribution to the Whitfield Mangerow House, with the understanding that when their carriage house renovation is complete, that will be our meeting place. We'll be able to share it. So if the groups can't stand on their own 2 feet because they don't have enough members, sometimes those alliances are what will keep things alive.
That are there any other questions that the three of you have for each other? And for those of you in the audience, feel free to put your questions into the Q&A. And our panelists, our speakers can speak to them as they come up. And was there anything else that came up between the three of you that you wanted to raise? We have a couple of compliments in the Q&A, which I so appreciate. And Jennifer Trackman says, would love contact information for these groups. I'm in Warren, Rhode Island, but would be interested in joining them.
Renee, you should feel free to send her my email and she can get in touch with me.
Thank you for that. Well, while people are thinking, I'm so interested in how the sort of built environment came up in all of your talks. I'm really, I mean, being local history guild here, right? Thinking about the significance of New Bedford, Fairhaven, thinking about the landscape, buildings. I'm wondering if you would be willing to speak more to that. Some architectural history perhaps being a contributing factor about how the built environment, how specific buildings, streets, areas, parts of the landscape really contribute to these amazing histories that you're each speaking to, and what's special about this particular uh, area or set of sort of factors, right? So, which I think really contributes to the embodiment of this collective action that you're each speaking to as well.
It's true. The Colonial Club is a very good example. It had the use of a building, which it improved greatly, and then it got another building. And without its buildings, it kind of collapsed. It was important for there to be a physical base for the group. I think Lee can say a lot more than I can about the importance of buildings, because she and her colleagues have preserved a whole neighborhood.
Because the built environment is kind of interesting in New Bedford, just looking at how people moved from the waterfront up to County Street and what it meant for them to kind of have these bigger homes that were made out of wood. In terms of like the built environment and a woman who had a big presence with it, I mean, one of the people I'm interested in is Sarah Roach Arnold, because she did a lot with the built environment, and we barely know enough about her to know how she managed it. I keep thinking about the fact that this is a woman who kind of commandeered her siblings into giving the New Bedford Port Society the Mariners' Home. And how often do you see a woman who's has that much power with her family to donate a building to another organization? And that's pretty amazing. I would love to know more about her story. And also the fact that, they when some of the first people who moved up to County Street. So that's a big part of changing the built environment.
So we have a question in the chat from someone who wanted to know how the women who went south, what kind of support did they get? So in New Bedford, they were very well supported by the women's organizations, the anti-slavery societies. But once they got down south, they had to deal with the hostilities of Reconstruction. Um, Ellen Kempton talks about how people who were involved in the Ku Klux Klan would come by and harass them. There are stories of Ellen would go to teach the young people, and when she came back to the house she was staying in, there'd be a big Bowie knife in the door. Go home. And you read these stories when you read some of the narratives from other women who went south. People did not want them to teach the African American community to read and write. So that's one of the questions. But the other question is, how do people help us with our research? So I'm lucky because I have a number of women who were very interested in doing some transcription work, for instance, some archive work, and they were just volunteers. They, sent me an email and asked to have coffee with me and asked if there were activities that they could um, be involved in. And they were retired, so they had time. It's not like I had to figure out what their work schedule was like or anything like that. But in the end, they are the people who transcribed Ellen Kempton's diary. And I would have been doing 100 things, and they just could do the diary. And I was so pleased with that. So if you are interested, and we have a couple of people who said are interested, they can reach out to us, and we'd certainly share our email addresses with them.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Marina, I see there's a question about, are there women-themed historical walking tours of New Bedford? And the National Park and the Whaling Museum did kind of pilot some walking tours, but we are currently not doing that. But at the Whaling Museum, the New Bedford Whaling Museum site, there's a Lighting the Way, where women in the community and from pretty much like Westport to almost Wareham have created more than 100 kind of biographical notes on different women in the community. And some of them we know where they lived, but it was difficult. Both Lee and I were on that committee, and that's one of the things that with women and with African Americans, you really can't find all of the, I'll say it this way, the resources that are related to those two groups are very hard to find because they've never really been considered important enough to save.
Right.
So they've both been erased pretty much from the historical records. So it's really hard to find actual resources such as buildings or schools or anything where you can kind of look and say, hey, this is a place to go. And yes, thank you. One of my coworkers mentioned we have a Women on Whale Ships walking tour for the national park, and we have a volunteer who does that, and she will be doing it this summer. But that's Women on Whaling Ships.
Also, the Lighting the Way is an exhibit right now until the end of April, the beginning of May. So a lot of the archival collections that the Whaling Museum has, they've organized it so it tells the story of women. So that might be a nice field trip for individuals who are from out of town.
That's right. Definitely come to see Lighting the Way. And we also have somebody in the Q&A. Freddie K says, I hope you might be willing to participate with the Mass Women's History Center as well. And Lee Brownhill also asks in the Q&A, as a previous congregant at the New Bedford Unitarian Universalist Church, were there significant overlaps in the lives of some of the women? If you have a perhaps have an answer to that, to the Unitarian Universalist Church?
Well, one of them, Frances Ellen Watkins Hopper, African-American woman, she gives her first speech in 1854 at the First Unitarian Church in New Bedford. So there are things that we do know about some of the individuals who are involved in our Unitarian Church. Frederick Douglass got his first job there. Mrs. Ephraim Peabody allowed Douglass to work for her, also to use the library. So we're always kind of picking at those threads and pulling on them and trying to elucidate more information on the relationships between some of the church minister wives, because they were pillars of society, but they also had a lot of responsibility.
Great, thank you, Lee. Got a heartwarming response from Lee Brownhill. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on today that any of our want to make sure the audience knows before we wrap up?
So to be done, a lot more research, plenty of opportunities.
Yeah, I saw the question from one of the attendees about being lay people. I mean, to be honest, I consider myself a lay person in research. So I think people always consider themselves lay people, and you're just looking just as much as anybody else. So I think the thing is you can just start anywhere and you don't have to be an expert. You just find something you're interested in and just start.
That's right. And librarians and archivists will help you get started. I've written books now. Let's see, 4 books about historic houses in New England, and my degrees are in Russian history. So go figure. You can do it.
Well, and to your point and Jan's point, we were all lay workers at one point in time. I did education in government, and I always wanted to know more. Like, women actually organized the whole social network in New Bedford. Daycare was started by women. Well, single women who were the daughters of whaling captains, they would inherit all this money, and they would say, well, I don't need to go to a ball. I can help fund kindergarten. And that's one of the wonderful things that you see with some of the single women in New Bedford, because they had been used to wealth for years, but they saw other ways of using their wealth. And it's looking for the opportunity to research who those women were, what organizations did they belong to, what organizations did they help start, like Fairhaven having a mother's club. So maternal health is such an issue even now. So you look at ways to research and tell those stories.
I think that's
I think that what Lee just said, the very last sentence is important. Don't think of it so much as doing research and doing history. Think of it as finding stories to tell, because that's really what we do.
That's exactly right. Thank you so much for sharing with all of us tonight, illuminating these stories. I hope we can all give you a virtual round of applause, that you're feeling that from these 26 or so households are tuning in tonight. So thank you. And I hope all of you in the audience will visit or engage with the organizations that wonderful speakers represent and get involved in the ways that you feel compelled to. This is an important time to be engaging in this kind of research, and it's really hard work, but yeah, I think starting anywhere. And thank you all for being inspiration and inspiration for collective action, as you articulated, Beth. Thank you for that. And I think with that, I will thank you all for tuning in to Local History Guild, and hopefully we will see you at the next coming in June. So thank you. Another virtual round of applause for everybody. The comments, the thank yous are coming in the Q&A and the chat here. So thank you, everybody, and enjoy your evening. Take good care, take care of each other, and have a good night. Thanks again, everybody. Thank you so, so much.